Okay, thank you. So for all of us that work in sustainability, we have a critical mission. We're going to move towards goals that are critical for our environment, our economy, for virtually being more efficient with the resources we have. Our sustainable future is a must-achieve goal, and I'm going to suggest that one of the most important assets that we have to get there are words. And not just words, power words. And let me see if this... There we go. And I'm going to suggest that not just words, but power words, and there's lots of research, lots of papers, lots of books, and I'll bring this quote to you as another indication how important words are. Words are, of course, the most powerful drug used by mankind, Rudyard Kipling. And not only are they powerful, I'll give my own quote, words are free. They're an asset we have to take advantage of. And let's look at some examples. So the seafood industry was really interested in getting us, the public, to eat a fish called the Patagonian toothfish. Wound up, it's really hard to sell toothfish. The American public just didn't have a taste for toothfish. So by one simple word change, Chilean sea bass, all of a sudden there's a fish that got so popular it was almost overfished to extinction. All it took was a word change. Same fish, same texture, same flavor, which were all great, but once it changed to sea bass, everything changed. So we can look at other examples, and they're equally powerful. There's one political group that was really trying to change our tax policy to reduce what's called the estate tax. But public opinion looked at the estate tax and just said, if you have an estate, why shouldn't you pay tax? So with a simple word change, it became something where the public could get on the side of this other political group that wanted the death tax. Why should you pay taxes just because you die? And just by changing the name, the word, everything flips in terms of the purpose of changing behavior and support for a movement. So we can do the same thing with the work we do trying to promote sustainable buildings. And I'll start with, it's really difficult to sell a home energy audit. And I could ask anyone in the room who wants to be audited, never a hand goes up. No one in the public is looking to be audited, poked and prodded and looked at for problems. It's no experience that any consumer wants. Why then would we call this process of going in and looking for opportunities to make buildings better an audit? A simple change to checkup, home energy checkup, and now we're calling this process where we go to buildings and look for opportunities to make them better by a name that we can relate to. We have checkups for our cars, a significant asset we own, or for our bodies, we go for health checkups to protect that asset. So words do make a difference. So we can get more specific and look at a technology called ventilation. And it's really difficult to sell a ventilation system. You know, if it's between granite counters and ventilation, that's not a hard choice. But we know every time we're in a house and it feels stuffy, we want fresh air. So why don't we just call the name of this technology a fresh air system? Name something not by the technical function, but by the experience that a consumer or user would want. Moving on, we try to get in high performance buildings fixes to them so they have reduced thermal bridging. And that's because framing is often a superhighway for heat flow out of a building. But from a consumer perspective, that's a very technical term. Why don't we just change it to the thermal blanket construction? We all understand being wrapped and cocooned in a blanket for comfort. Another example would be passive solar. Passive is such a negative connotation for most people. To be passive is not considered a good attribute. And then we have everything that builds into that with also very technical function names. So to do a passive solar building, we have solar orientation, solar shading, daylighting, thermal mass, cross ventilation. Basically what you're seeing is we have a whole bunch of technical terms to explain a concept that's passive. And I would suggest that we need again to go to a much more powerful word, and that would be natural comfort. And if we click this again, we'll see that that involves natural heating, natural cooling, natural light, natural comfort control, and natural fresh air. All the exact same technologies, but with terms that speak to the experience instead of the technical function. And so what we did at the Department of Energy has actually come up with an entire translator for over 220 different measures that are used to create high-performance buildings, and we put them and compiled them into a whole project called the Building America Building Science Translator. But that's not what this talk's about. So let me translate up higher from just buildings to the entire planet. And we've heard a lot about hockey sticks, lots of debates, lots of arguments. But basically what hockey sticks do are they're environmental trend curves that reveal uncharted territory. And that's both in terms of historic levels of planet change and velocity. And this is the part that's really scary, how fast we're moving at unprecedented levels. And let's look at some of these hockey sticks. This is temperature over time, lots of debate about how these curves are constructed, but there's no doubt the empirical evidence that the planet's getting hotter and hotter. And what should be the most scary is the rate of change and how steep the curves are. There are many variations about what the future path is, but every one of them is incredibly steep. Next. And so we can then look at the next step, which is a hockey stick curve for CO2. Lots of variations, but now we've gone to the historic level of over 400 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere, and we've gone at a rate that we've just never seen before. Purely measured data. And we can just look at something as simple as population. The world's population took 300,000 years to reach the first billion, and 5th and 6th billion were each achieved in 12 years or less. As it's an exploding number of people on the planet that have more and more impacts on the planet. This line shows what's happened in terms of growth ever since fossil fuels started to be used. So clearly, lots of indicators by these curves. And the global warming evil twin is called ocean acidification. 30% of the CO2 that's produced by humans is actually absorbed by the oceans. So aragonite is a mineral, calcium carbonate, that's decreasing because of all the additional CO2 in the oceans. And as it gets redder and redder, you see more and more decrease in the mineral, and basically that's flagging all the dead zones that are happening in oceans all across the globe, to the point where we're moving towards almost the inability for our oceans to sustain breeding of new life. Next. And also we can just look at visual indicators that the planet's changing. The Schweitz ice shelf in Antarctica is having whole chunks of ice fall into the ocean, sometimes the size of states. And the reason this is happening is because the ocean currents are getting warmer and warmer and underpinning the structure that keeps these ice shelves from falling into the ocean. So there are amazing changes. Some might suggest it's almost like humans now are in the pot that's getting hotter and hotter. And at this point, we're really worried about whether we can actually avoid the 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature in the planet that many call the tipping point, when environmental impacts become more and more damaging to human life. We're at a point where we have to change. So that gets me to the point where I just figured, what if I was the climate change communications czar? What if I was a communications czar and I was responsible for how we communicated about climate change in a public-facing communication? And I realized I would change everything. No way that we speak about climate change today speaks in a way that's most effective from the czar's perspective. So let's look at how I would change our language. It starts first with the core word, and this core word is substance. And basically, a substance is an addictive, consumptive product with harmful side effects. With that as a base, let's look at the first term, fossil fuel. Okay, fossil fuel isn't really fossil fuel, it's a fossil substance. And a fossil substance basically is an addictive carbon-based energy resource like gasoline, oil, natural gas, coal, with harmful side effects associated with exploration, extraction, processing, distribution, consumption, and emissions. Okay, that's our first term. We never talk about fossil fuel, we talk about fossil substances. So then when we have a fossil fuel dependency, really what we have is a fossil substance abuse. And that can be defined as the excessive use of fossil substances that leads to negative environmental, health, and economic impacts. You all with me? Okay, next is a quote from Jimmy Carter in the process of developing the Department of Energy. One of the really important quote from a document he wrote is that prices should generally reflect the true replacement costs of energy. We're only cheating ourselves if we make energy artificially cheap and use more than we can really afford. So this concept of true cost is really important. Yet, when we go and talk about economically what we're doing, we're often talking about more technical concepts like external costs. So I would change that to true costs. Go back to where Jimmy Carter was in 1977, and that's the full cost incurred using a product or service that includes all direct and indirect costs. And so I can make a table of these fossil substance indirect costs, and our strategic interest protection, military interventions alone have been calculated by some as $7 or $8 trillion over the last decade. Lost income from lives lost and what we have lost from their production, and then the injured lifetime health care for the many, many thousands that come back from these interventions. Emissions, extractions, and transport, there are public health problems due to air quality, water quality, the environmental damage repair to the Gulf, to the Exxon Valdez, and many, many endless cases that occur, long-term climate impacts that are continually to build, national security, we have to have reserves for oil that costs us billions of dollars just to protect the shortage that may occur with a supply disruption. We have safety factors in terms of keeping reserves, and shipping lane protection is a huge expense. I think the numbers I've last seen was $7 trillion over the last 30, 40 years to protect our shipping lanes so oil can reach our country. And economic, the treasury expenses for fossil fuel exploration and discovery are huge. Job losses, trade imbalance. So we have a really impressive list of indirect costs. And what we usually do is assume they're zero. Now, if I just made an educated guess and looked at all those trillions of expenditures and assigned a dollar value per gallon, I can come up with a number like $5 a gallon. So what would happen in a hypothetical example, and these are just guesses because we have to get off zero, is direct cost is $2.50 at the pump. Indirect cost for gas is $5 that we just in our hypothetical example. So the really true cost of gasoline is about $7.50 a gallon, much like you pay in Europe. And so for this hypothesis, it looks like we're spending about $7 trillion, almost $1 trillion a year to subsidize our nation's addiction to cheap gasoline. Next, look how we communicate about the cost of electricity. Here's a study where I pulled a chart out of, and you can see that gas and coal are like the cheapest energy sources, and that's what this finding of the study was. But really what this chart shows is the partial cost, not the full cost, the true cost. And so if I go and look at this table again and look at all the environmental and economic impacts of coal, let's say, versus solar electricity, I can make an educated guess at those indirect costs of all the cleanup and stripping of mountains and rivers that are being destroyed might be 6 cents a kilowatt hour, and solar would be negligible. There are some environmental impacts, but also we're adding jobs that are persisting. So we have that comparison. So the true cost in a hypothetical example might be 16 cents for coal-generated electricity versus 13 cents for solar. So in this hypothesis, maybe, in fact, solar is 20% lower cost than coal. So it brings us back to our terminology. Is it really cheap fossil fuel, or really is the term that we should be using subsidized fossil substances? Artificially low-cost fossil substance made possible by massive public expenditures hidden in tax policies, government budgets, healthcare costs, environmental cleanup, economic job loss, and natural defense. And this is the term that I would virtually forbid anyone to ever use: carbon tax. Why in good heavens would we go out and try to do something that's so important for our environment, our economy, our health, and call it a tax? It's not a tax. What it is it's a free market adjustment, a fossil substance free market adjustment. It's a cost adjustment to ensure the government does not unintentionally impact free market forces by neglecting the indirect cost of fossil substances. So, they do the same thing with renewable energy. You're not allowed to use the term renewable energy subsidy. It's not a subsidy, it's a free market adjustment, a renewable energy free market adjustment, a cost adjustment to ensure the government does not unintentionally impact free market forces in absence of fossil substance free market adjustments. So I can be against subsidies, But how can I be against free market adjustments? Why would I not choose a power word that everyone would have to agree with versus a term that would immediately be offensive to maybe half my audience? Next term, clean energy programs. In fact, really what they are fossil substance abuse treatment centers. Who knew that's what I do for a living? I work for a treatment center. Programs provided to help fossil substance addicts become economically, environmentally, physically, spiritually healthier by switching to clean energy alternatives. And so remember though, without treatment, addictions usually don't go well. So treatment centers are really important. And just to give you how valuable, well, first let me give you a list of treatment centers that are out there that we all know about. Energy Star, Zero Energy Ready Home, Passive House, Green Building Standards by NHB and USGBC, Living Building Challenge, and so forth. There are lots of treatment centers. I'm going to highlight just a few that are good government programs, particularly Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready Home. And let me show you why they're good government. Over the 15 years while I was working with Energy Star certified homes, I added up all the investment both for staff and for contract dollars. It came to about $40 million. Now the return on that investment was about $1.5 billion in consumer energy savings from direct buyers of Energy Star homes. In addition, non-participant savings were about $1 billion too, because often improvements that are made to build homes to Energy Star are carried over to other homes not in the program. And all these homes had higher value and therefore higher tax revenue for the local communities. And the savings in pollution was about equivalent to almost 500,000 cars. So that's, go back a second. So that's about 1,000 to 1 return. And if we only get, it's a 400 to 1 return on investment, and or 100 to 1 return on investment. And if we only get 10% attribution for our program, that's a 10 to 1 return or 1,000% return on investment for that treatment center. Really valuable programs in the marketplace. And now with Zero Energy Ready Home here at the Department of Energy, we're projecting almost $1/3 of a trillion energy savings when we reach 30% market penetration, 120,000 persistent new jobs that can't be outsourced, which is about 3 million job years of work, and almost 3 million metric tons of reduced carbon emissions. Treatment centers are really effective. So I'm going to wrap up now with just a story that speaks to how this whole thing comes together for me. And believe it or not, it's with this stupid habit I have of picking up garbage. I'll go on walks with my wife, and if I see a piece of garbage that's not biodegradable, it's like this forced habit that I have to pick it up. This habit's gotten so bad, I've gotten to carry garbage bags with me when I go on my walks with my wife. She's saying, please, Sam, will you stop picking up garbage? Can we just take a walk? And it's almost like it's just something that I cannot not do. So we're on vacation with our kids, we're at the beach, we're walking in Nags Head back to our car, and I see this piece of glass, a shard of glass sitting in the sand. And again, I cannot help myself, but I want to stay out of trouble, so I let my wife and kids walk ahead, and then I bend down and pick up this piece of glass. And I thought I was clear, but my youngest daughter catches me. And this is the daughter that shouldn't catch you. She's so inquisitive, and she so much wants to understand what's behind everything. She says, Dad, why did you pick up that piece of glass? I said, look, I just picked it up. I always drive Mom crazy because I pick up garbage. I let you guys get ahead. I just want to pick it up and want to keep going. She says, but why are you doing that? I said, Amanda, don't worry about it. I just want to pick it up and I just want to keep going. She says, but there must be some reason you're doing it. And I kind of just sit there and I'm kind of just really kind of in my head, why am I really doing this? And this big thought hits me. And I go to Amanda, I think I know why I do this. I have the power to leave a place better off because I was here by my actions. I have a power to leave a place better off because I was here. Maybe that's why I do all the choices I choose to work with Energy Star, to work with Department of Energy, Zero Energy Ready Home. It's this amazing opportunity to leave the place better off because you're here. So that almost brings me up to the ultimate power word, which is actually power. We do have the power to make changes. And if I go back to think about climate change, that's the wrong term completely to what we're trying to do. What we're really doing is trying to have the power to make the world better. Planet stewardship, any activity or initiative that leverages our power to leave the planet better off for future generations because we were here. Here's a piece of land, beautiful, sat there for tens of thousands of years, never changed except for, as the rivers kind of migrated in and out, lush, beautiful. Then in a blip of time, it becomes this. Our human actions are amazingly impactful on the environment. This city now is committed to reduce its carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. The actions we take are really powerful. The words we use are powerful. We really can make a difference. So words are free. Use the power ones. They're an amazing asset for everyone. Your planet stewardship communications are, thank you.